Hello, I am Bekah Hawrot Weigel, and I'm here today to talk to you about community and gatekeepers. I'm a front-end developer, and you can find me on social media at BekahHW. I gave this talk last August for the first time, and a lot has changed since then. Definition of communities, realizations of what it means to be a gatekeeper, our own complicity in gatekeeping have shaped this talk in many ways that I couldn't have imagined. A pandemic drove us to find new ways to form community. Out of that, I was very lucky to form Virtual Coffee, a community of developers that meets a couple of times a week, that's thriving and growing in ways that I never could have expected. But more importantly, the Black Lives Matters movement has brought attention to how racism has continually impacted our communities and gatekeeping, bringing a new perspective to this talk. In many ways, this talk is now more complex and heavier than ever. It's one of those things that you have to think deeply about. To stop being defensive and to evaluate our own biases, racist behaviors, and what it means to be a community member. In a lot of ways, this talk is about what we've all been going through since childhood. The question of whether or not you can join that group on the playground. Are you cool enough? Have you proven yourself? Do you know the secret password? So you walk up to the circle and you say, "Can I play?" And the look alone tells you that no, you can't. Can't be a part of that group. As far as I can tell, those decisions are based in nothing but the drive to keep a club exclusive and to exclude people. As adults, we're not that far removed from this playground. It just looks a little different. It's Twitter, it's Slack, it's interview processes, it's other forms of social media. It's the communities that we form, that we're a part of, it's our own workspaces. But now we have words for what this is called. Gatekeepers. Gatekeepers at the very core are people or organizations that prevent people from achieving their goals. Here's the thing, lots of times we don't even realize that we're being gatekeepers. It's that look that says it all. A sigh, an eye roll. It's systemic issues like sexism, racism, ageism. It's not taking the time to correct other people's attitudes or comments. Here's the thing, I might get things wrong about this. You might get things wrong about this. But the thing about not being a gatekeeper and being a good community builder or a member is to take the time to listen to those around you, even when it's painful. Notice, I did not say if it is painful. It will be. Because you will get things wrong, but you learn and you grow. So to try and keep this talk organized, I'm going to use the RPG method when we talk about community and gatekeepers. I don't mean role-playing game, although it could be really helpful if you're putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. I am talking about recognizing gatekeeping, preventing it, and generating positive communities. Because when we are more aware of the things that push other people away, we can build more positive, productive, and stronger communities that allow everyone to grow. So why am I here to talk to you about gatekeeping? What makes me qualified? Well, for one, I started my career as a community organizer. I worked with communities that I met with for the first time, communities with deeply ingrained problems, and communities that I became a part of. I've been an academic events coordinator where I worked with 13 different departments. I taught in higher ed for 10 years, where each class was its own community, with a variety of talents and strengths and weaknesses. I spent the last couple of months developing Virtual Coffee community, where we have members at all stages of their development journey, and we're growing and growing every day. I've also studied the mythic journey. Okay, spoiler alert, the hero never saves the world on their own. There's a community or a mentor that provides the hero with what they need to succeed, what they need to make it past gatekeepers. I've seen how Frodo could never have destroyed the ring without his community, how the Avengers needed each other to save the world, how having a group of people you can trust elevates what you can accomplish. I've written stories with heroes and gatekeepers in community. I've formed communities. I've unintentionally been a gatekeeper. But understanding good communities and part of being solid communities is just part of my experience. Unfortunately, I've also seen how good communities can change. I've seen how even the most supportive communities can become toxic, how one person can break the trust of an entire group. because a community is a living, breathing, and growing thing. You have to evaluate your behaviors, your procedures, a mission to create a more positive community. Recognizing gatekeepers and creating positive communities are not one-time things. They're ongoing processes that require work and growth at every step, but they're well worth it. Now, to make it into the community, we have to get past the gatekeepers. In The Lord of the Rings, the Black Riders and the Balrogs were clearly gatekeepers. They're terrifying to look at. They stopped the company, the group that was trying to destroy the ring before it destroyed Middle-earth as they knew it. These are obvious gatekeepers, and they're just one type of gatekeeper. The obvious gatekeepers are the ones that stand in front of us and they tell us we're not good enough. They tell us what a real programmer looks like, that you have to be a 10x programmer, that if you don't have a CS degree, you aren't good enough, that if you've taught people to code but haven't worked as an engineer, you don't have enough experience. They scoff and call you newbies. They give you that look like the kids on the playground, the one that says it all. They comment on your gender, your race, your appearance. They make you feel like you're not worthy of being part of the community. In my free time, I write screenplays, and my favorite screenwriter, John August, was looking for a coder to work on a contract basis, and I was like, sweet, I would love to have this opportunity. And then I found out he needed someone to be working in Swift. I've not used Swift. So I asked Twitter, like, what's the learning curve if I know Ruby and if I know React? And one of the first responses I received was, do you need to learn how to use a keyboard and a mouse too? This guy was a Class A troll. He was a gatekeeper. Words like these never welcome people into tech. On the bright side, some of the community came to my defense. I'll touch more on this later, but as privileged tech community members, it's our job to help fight the gatekeepers. It's exhausting to try and break into tech, let alone do it while fighting off people who don't want you there, who are trying to keep you out. Here's the thing, for most of us, those encounters aren't a one-time thing. We face them again and again, and those experiences sometimes create the fear that doesn't leave us. The problems with tech start at the very beginning. I could write a whole talk on the interview process, and some people have. I'm just going to touch on it briefly here. A friend of mine was working on a whiteboard challenge where the interviewer said something to the effect of, you would do it that way. You're new. She was applying to a junior developer position. Another friend started her first job as a developer. She loved the company and was really excited about the work. When she got there, on the first day, she was ushered down the hall into a room and given instructions on how she needed to call the president of the company right away. She had been mistaken for the new secretary. Just a couple of months ago, I was offered a position after a couple of interviews in a take-home project. When I was asked for an hourly rate, I told them $70 an hour. And the founder told me she wanted to offer me $30 an hour to do more work, since I'd only been a developer for about a year. In a later conversation, she told me I was overvaluing myself. And what made it worse was that another one of the employees told me that I had done better than the senior developers who had taken the take-home test. She didn't care about my abilities. She took the time to make me second-guess myself and to think that I wasn't good enough to ask for that much money. And to be honest, it took me a long time to realize that she was wrong. As we make our way through the coding journey, there are plenty of people who are going to think we're not good enough, that something makes us less worthy. How many times have you heard the story of a woman being mistaken for a non-technical partner at a conference? Are you here with your husband? They're asked as they stand in a group with a conference speaker badge. Women are speakers too. Some gatekeepers are like the Black Riders. It's clear that there's problems on sites like Stack Overflow where replies to questions demean the asker, where the responses aren't helpful or productive in any way, where the responders say things like, do you even know what JavaScript is? Or have you even read the docs? When the docs are known to be really dense, difficult, and not accessible to new coders. Some responders actually have the audacity to make fun of the question. If we can't ask questions, we can't grow. And if we don't make coding accessible to everyone, we're losing diversity and the rich depth that comes from welcoming people of all different backgrounds to the community. For a long time, I had no idea what foobar meant, all right? At first, I thought it was some type of reserved set of words for coding that I just didn't understand. But I was too afraid to ask. Part of forming a good community is making sure that nobody is afraid to ask a question. Now, we might groan when we hear these terrible examples, and many of them are easy to pick up on. We know that they're wrong. But there are others that are more subtle and that we might be doing ourselves. As a bootcamp grad, I'm always an advocate for hiring other bootcamp grads, but it had never occurred to me that CS grads might have a difficult time getting a job too. And then I saw a tweet where somebody with a CS degree who had taught for 10 years was turned away from jobs for lack of real experience. Let's talk about this word real for a second. It's a pet peeve of mine. In The Lord of the Rings, some of the characters at the Council of Elrond didn't believe that Frodo could carry the ring because he wasn't like them. He hadn't been to war. He was a hobbit. They didn't believe he could be a real hero because he didn't look like them or have their experience. What does it mean to be a real programmer? Is someone who writes in HTML and CSS not a real programmer? Is someone who's self-taught not a real programmer? What makes someone a real programmer? I have a master's degree in English and I'm a bootcamp grad. I'm a real programmer. If you write code, you are a real programmer. If you can complete the project you need to, you're qualified. Doesn't matter how many years you've been doing it. If you need to look up an answer, you're a real programmer. When we use the word real to describe someone, we're implicitly saying that some people can't be part of the club. They aren't real enough to be our equals. Whenever we make someone feel like they aren't part of the group, we are being gatekeepers, whether or not it's intentional. When you're using acronyms or jargon, define it first. And don't precede it with the statement of, in case you didn't know, or for those of you who don't know. You're creating a separation in the community when you do that. In us, the people who are in the inner circle, and them, the people who are outside and don't know. Other ways we can be gatekeepers are interrupting others, or assuming we know the questions they're going to ask, or what their intentions are. It's not challenging overt gatekeepers. If you allow someone to feel unwelcome because you don't want to feel uncomfortable, you're a gatekeeper too. Not explaining office nuances or processes is equally important. I used to organize academic events. When I started the job, I was given a manual that hadn't been updated in years. The woman who had the job before me had been doing it for a really long time, and she did it very well, so she didn't need to update the manual. So I only had a semi-mapped out path, but also I didn't have access to institutional knowledge. And this got me into trouble pretty quickly. Maybe my second day on the job, someone came up to me and asked if we could reserve the front seats at an event for people who had disabilities. I said, that's a great idea. I can't believe we're not already doing that. Maybe the same day, I mentioned this to another department head who was immediately infuriated. Those seats had long been assigned to big donors, and I had just given them away. What I didn't realize was that this was an age-old battle, and I was now in the middle of it. Setting an employee up to not understand office politics isn't the best way to start. I had to seek out, in archetypal terms, the wise old sage, the Yoda figure, who had been there and who knew everyone for the past 30 years, and I had to find her on my own. And then when I did, my boss requested I no longer talk to her and gave no reasons. I don't know about you, but I'm always interested in how things happen and why they happen. I felt like a child who was being scolded. Create clear lines of communication. Give employees mentors. If not, you're setting them up for failure. You're being a gatekeeper. Part of gatekeeping includes office cultures and interview practices. if you don't offer any flexibility, schedule late or evening meetings or events, or use language that alienates people in your community, you're pushing them out of the circle. So I do a lot of work with moms who code groups, and there's frequent discussion about how office culture can be really difficult to navigate. I think that most, but not all of this extends to the primary parent. If a company doesn't truly value work-life balance or work-life harmony, it doesn't recognize the need to be flexible for parents and respect their family time. Then there's an outer circle. Work-life harmony is for everyone. Along with this, not interviewing people who have a resume gap for taking time off to care for kids or a loved one closes the door to diversity. We know that the interview process is broken and that many of the questions that are asked aren't applicable or made to trick interviewees. There are people who give whole talks on this, but if we can at least add this to the list and think about what meaningful questions are, how the questions can help to find the right fit for the position, we're opening the circle and inviting someone new in. Now, if you're like me, you might get really excited about these things, think about how you can decrease gatekeeping, and then you might forget about it. Scheduling time to do both the self-evaluation and to ask those around you how you're doing is really important in maintaining a positive community. In my first job as a community organizer, I walked into a really complicated situation. The organization had started in a woman's home and had grown into 2 full-time and 1 part-time positions with its own storefront, helping citizens in a tri-state area. From what I could tell from reading past correspondences, it started as a group of friends. Did not feel that way anymore. The tension was palpable, but it was accepted at the cost of being able to help more people. In this case, the gatekeepers were the employees and the board members who let it get to this point and thought it would be a good time to hire a new employee. They allowed obstacles to be created in this environment and prevented the employees from accomplishing their work. Having a broken internal community should never be the cost for helping a larger external community. For most companies, that will eventually cause the problem that prevents them from growing at all. If this small nonprofit would have taken time to survey the employees, to talk things over with the board before I got there, they could have solved some of these problems. We're not perfect, right? We do things that unintentionally hurt other people. So being able to face that when we ask others how we're doing is a huge part of the growing process. Now, when we're both able to recognize the overt gatekeepers and how we can prevent gatekeeping ourselves, we're better able to stop gatekeeping. One way to do this is by surveying your company or doing a self-evaluation. Some questions that you might ask yourself when you're doing a self-evaluation is, do you listen to others? Are you open to ideas that aren't your own? Do you treat people with kindness? Do you ask others questions? Am I willing to change? What are the behaviors that I need to change? You know, one thing that was recently brought up in our virtual coffee Slack is, do you thank the people around you? And I think that's really important. I worked in a job for 8 years and I didn't dislike the job, but I didn't realize how much better it could be. Because in those 8 years, I don't think I heard thank you more than twice. Moving to a new position where I heard thank you and you're doing a good job made a huge difference in morale. And it became a place that I enjoyed working, where I love doing the tasks that are assigned to me. So even very simple things like making sure that you're thanking those around you are really important in establishing community. Now, some other things that you might do is survey the community. Ask questions about whether or not the leadership is doing their job, whether people like to work there, how you can support people in other ways, what can make the organization more effective. What are the positive things that the organization is doing? What are the weaknesses? How can you become a more inclusive community? Chances are, if it's a safe space, you'll get some answers that are going to cause you to have to do a really hard evaluation of what you're doing. but that's good. That's how you grow. One of the greatest ways to prevent gatekeeping is by being willing to admit that what you've done wrong and apologize. If you've done something that's impeded someone's growth, it's okay to apologize. To take responsibility for your own behavior and its effects on others, whether or not it was intentional. Try to be deliberate in your interactions with others. Listen to what people have to say. I'm going to repeat that. Listen to what others have to say. Unintentional gatekeeping can be the hesitation in the conversation. When you let your mind drift and you don't make somebody feel validated for their input. When you don't give them a chance to participate. Sometimes things happen with the greatest of intentions. But you have to make sure you're always letting people grow. You can offer mentorship, but offering to take over a project and a task implies that you don't think the person is smart enough to figure it out. A Black woman in tech described the time she's come in contact with gatekeepers as death by 1,000 cuts. This really sticks with me because it's not a one-time big event that was her first response. It was all the little things. The things that we do when we're unintentional, when we're not empathetic, when we don't listen to the lived experiences of other people, when we don't lift up their voices, when we don't challenge what's going on in the workplace. Very few, and maybe none of us, can sit here and say we are not or have not been gatekeepers. That's why this needs to be an active conversation. A deliberate personal and organizational evaluation. It shouldn't feel good, but it will make things better. When you can recognize where gatekeeping is happening, you can prevent it as well. So a lot of prevention comes from being aware that it could happen. It's using a person-centered approach, driven by empathy and the mindset that each person on your team has something valuable to contribute. It's allowing everyone to speak at the Council of Elrond. Here's my picture. In The Lord of the Rings, many different races were trying to determine what to do with this ring. A ring that was forged by the Dark Lord Sauron as part of his design to win dominion over Middle-earth. The hobbits weren't known for being adventurous. In fact, they mostly stayed in their calm homeland, the Shire, because they weren't interested in adventure. Yet here Gandalf, the wizard, who was leading the company who would destroy the ring, invited these unlikely heroes to the council to decide what to do with the ring. And because he allowed them to come on this journey, the ring that could have defeated them all was destroyed. Part of avoiding gatekeeping and forming positive communities means being an advocate for those who are being pushed out of the inner circle. One thing that I love talking about that applies to in-person conferences is the Pac-Man method. So if we ever get back to the point where we can see each other, keep this in mind. So I am a shy introvert, and the first conference I went to, I went with my husband, who's a developer, and I had just been learning how to code, so not very long. I was very, very nervous to be there. And in my mind, all of these scenarios had played out where people told me that I wasn't good enough to be there. But in one of my first experiences, this made a difference, such a difference for me. So my husband was talking in this group with some experienced programmers, and I just kind of snuck in the group and stood there quietly, hoping that nobody would look at me or talk to me or tell me to get lost. But that's not what happened at all. Okay, so one of the people who was part of the group said, hey, welcome to the group. Let's use the Pac-Man method. And what's the Pac-Man method? Okay, so it's when you have a circle, you always leave room for another person to come in. So I came in and I filled in that spot, and then we moved out a little bit more. The Pac-Man method always leaves space for a new member, essentially welcoming someone who isn't part of the group. And do you know what the best part was? I never felt to be made new or unworthy of being there, which was my greatest fear. Now with COVID restrictions, this Pac-Man method takes on a new meaning. We're not so much concerned with the physical space of allowing people to stand in our group. But what we do need to work on is allowing space for other people's voices to be heard, for bringing diversity into our teams. And in many ways, this might be more important than that physical presence of allowing people in at the conference. Now is a time to be very deliberate about making space for other voices, the voices of those, especially in the Black community, who've been silenced for so long, to do what we can to make them feel like part of the community. In many ways, we have to be very deliberate. It's not something that we do for a weekend at a conference and then move on. And to be honest, I think we need to move beyond that in the virtual space. It's not always about letting people be part of the conversation. It's not just letting the hobbits in the company. It's about amplifying the voices of those who have been excluded, who have experienced gatekeeping at the very worst. Because if we don't do that, then we fail to acknowledge the shortcomings of the community. We fail to grow in complex ways. Look at the people around you. Be active in engaging them. I've heard people use the excuse, well, they didn't say anything, so I thought they didn't want to talk. Here's the thing. If you've already been made to feel like you're an outsider, like you don't belong in the circle, it can be really hard to talk unless you're engaged first. It's not always the case, and sometimes people don't want to talk. However, engaging others in the conversation by asking them questions, by creating a welcoming and inclusive environment will go a long way. One of the most important things, I think, for generating positive communities is having mentors. I know that my job as a community organizer and event planner, I would have benefited from a mentor. I love this tweet from Molly Struve. I think this is a little over a year old, but it does a great job of presenting both a positive and a realistic approach. It shouldn't be difficult for a new dev to know where to ask questions. When I walked into my position as a community organizer, my onboarding was read through everything on the shelf, which was years and years of technical documents, outdated organizing materials, and a variety of emails. That's not onboarding. Having clear lines of communication, making sure employees feel welcome to ask questions, to get an oral history of the organization, is the key to generating positive communities. Providing an oral history means providing access to the story and the progress of the organization. Information so that nobody has a problem understanding the roles of each of the team members. It means giving the origin story so someone can better understand the group and parts of the team. Setting a support system in place means looking at the community and deliberately considering what a new person would need to know in order to succeed at their position. Other options are regularly scheduling pair programming sessions, allowing time for feedback, and creating an environment driven by learning and not fear. Every hero needs a mentor, and so does every developer if we're going to set them up to succeed, if we're going to encourage them to be part of this community. When we set everyone up to succeed, it means we're focused on creating a more positive community. Now that I've been talking about the community, notice I haven't been talking about making the community more productive. Although this is often the end goal, what gets people to productivity is everything that happens before that. What you do need is leadership skills, teaching skills, and team member skills. In James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, he writes, "Nothing sustains motivation better than belonging to the tribe. It transforms a personal quest into a shared one. Previously, you were on your own. Your identity was singular. You are a reader. You are a musician. You are an athlete. When you join a book club or a band or a cycling group, your identity becomes linked to those around you. Growth and change is no longer an individual pursuit. We are readers, we are musicians, and we are cyclists. The shared identity begins to reinforce your personal identity. This is why remaining part of the group after achieving a goal is crucial to maintaining your habits. It's friendship and community that embed a new identity that help behaviors last over the long run." So in our case, many of us are coders. With the rise of second career developers and those who aren't using curriculums to learn or those in online boot camps, we're coming from a singular identity. But the key part of building successful community of those from diverse backgrounds is allowing everyone to feel part of the team. That leads to productivity. That leads to we instead of I. Let's go back to the Lord of the Rings example. The hobbits were the least likely characters to carry the ring. Their understanding of war and darkness and heroism was limited to the PG version of the Shire. But Gandalf didn't say they wouldn't fit the company culture. He saw that their differences would enrich it and actually lead them to victory. He didn't say, sure, come along, but don't speak up, and if you make the wrong move, you're on your own, back to the Shire. No, they were invited to the Council of Elrond, and Frodo, maybe the least likely hero, carried the ring. And Sam, maybe a little bit more unlikely hero, carried Frodo. The point is that the most unsuspecting heroes can be the ones who help you achieve the community's goals if you let them, if you set them up to succeed. I'm going to jump to my own story for a minute. When I started coding, I was fresh off of a major medical trauma. I had panic attacks, depression, and PTSD. I don't exactly sound like the best candidate to create community. But here's the thing. Because of all of that, I'm better at building communities. Because I learned without community support, I couldn't be where I am today. And when someone feels supported, there's an organic relationship that's formed. And those are the ones that are the most beneficial. When I'm happy with something or someone, I'm way more likely to talk about it and to encourage others to know more about it. On the first day of quarantine, I went to my kids' school to pick up their books, and I came home and found out that I was out of a job. Honestly, this was all really devastating, really quick. But from that experience and my previous experience, I knew that the way that I would get through this is with community. And so I started virtual coffee. Initially, I just asked everyone on Twitter if they wanted to meet up at 9 a.m. Eastern time, and I sent out Zoom links through Twitter DMs. And then this amazing thing happened. People kept coming. And then we started doing it twice a week. And then we had a Slack. And then we had a sign-up place and a code of conduct and a series of mock interviews and brown bag sessions and mentoring one-on-one sessions. All of these things happened, and we grew in ways that I never anticipated. And what I found as we grew into something I most certainly did not expect was that I grew as well. I learned about making space for all voices. I messed up. I still mess up. I apologized. I listened to feedback. We've had difficult conversations. We've shared our sadness, we shared our happiness, and we've cheered each other on. I'm continually trying my best to open this community to everyone of different backgrounds. My favorite part of the community is the mentorship that happens on a daily basis. I'm really proud of the diversity and the ability to share varying opinions in this community. I'm proud of the fact that we're championing each other. I'm proud that I know that I can go to other community members when I have a problem, when I need help with code, or, you know what, when I'm just having a really rough day. I know I'm going to get honesty, and I know I'm going to get empathy. And when communities are built on honesty and organically, growth happens naturally. Now, I'm not saying that I'm doing the best job in the world, and I know that I've messed up, and I know there's probably ways that I've messed up that I'm not even sure of right now, and I'm probably going to mess up in the future. But it's that constant idea of continuing to grow, to continually try to improve and make it a space for everyone that makes it worth doing. I think that if we continue to grow and build communities like this, we can start to alleviate some of the stress that causes imposter syndrome. I hear it from everyone at every stage of the journey. When you're learning to code by yourself, it's hard to gauge what's normal or whether you're not good enough. Side note, you are good enough. I've only been a developer for a year, but I can tell you it's been the absolute best job experience I've had since I was a lifeguard in high school. And here's why. I felt like I belonged from the very first minute I opened Zoom to talk things through with my boss. Let me back up for a second. and talk about my initial experience. When I was first looking for a job, I was looking for part-time, flexible, remote, meaningful work, and mentorship. I was asking for a lot, but I was going to go for it. I got all of these except one. And the thing is, I've got that with virtual coffee. This virtual coffee has been the most meaningful thing I've done as part of the community. My first Zoom session with my boss to talk about the position was exactly how most moms would want things to go. He had already looked at my code, he was familiar with my background, and we talked about our families. I wasn't afraid to mention that I had 4 kids under 10. I know people would not recommend you do that in an interview, but it was important to me. I'm unapologetically a mom. 2 weeks after that initial meeting, I was set to start. In our first meeting after I started coding, he made sure that he asked if I had any questions multiple times. And when we met midweek, during that first week, he clearly said this wasn't in some way a progress report or a checkup. He just wanted to see if he could help and in any way and learn a bit more about my process. In other words, he was using a person-first approach. Person-centered care, it's a term that I'm stealing from the medical community, is when a person puts your experiences, well-being, needs, and feelings at the center of caring and support process. And it means we seek to understand and have empathy for your daily experience. If we remember that, each of the people in our communities aren't just workers, they're dynamic human beings with multiple responsibilities outside of work who succeed and who fail every day. If we remember that, we'll do a better job of avoiding becoming gatekeepers and creating stronger communities. When we use this person-centered approach, a couple of things should happen. Empathy is increased as we move from a me-them model to a we-us model. So what exactly does that mean? It means that we work together as a team to accomplish a goal, rather than making someone feel excluded from the team, rather than placing blame. This is not to say that there's no leadership. If anything, the leader should establish this mentality and make it easier for the other teammates to follow suit. Be a Gandalf. When I wrote my first press release as a community organizer, I used a lot of they to refer to the community that I was working with. I was lucky to have a really great mentor from a sister organization, and she pointed this out. She said, "You're a part of the group. We're in this together to accomplish something." And if I use language like they, I was automatically adding space between me and them. This example covers my next point too. If someone is acting in a way that hurts the community, it's okay to call them out. In fact, if you're in a privileged position, it's your job to do it. The onus should never be on the person or group who's being made to feel less than. I've heard a lot of Black community members talk about how tired they are because they are constantly bearing the weight of being Black in tech, of mostly white people demanding that they explain their feelings and their experiences, that they be the ones to educate the community. That's not okay. We can educate ourselves. We need to do what we can to alleviate the heaviness that we've likely helped to create, whether intentionally or unintentionally. We need to accept responsibility, because I can guarantee that the uncomfortableness that this may cause us is nowhere near what it has caused members of the Black community. Okay, so now there are different methods of doing this, but let's stick to the person-centered approach. It's more effective to come at this with care and empathy because it's a naturally difficult situation to be in. I love a good code of conduct. I know not everybody reads them, but it sets up the type of environment that's expected. It makes it easier for someone to address conflicts that they see. Having something like this in the workplace or community that everyone reviews or agrees upon helps to establish a strong community. Allowing everyone to become active participants in establishing the type of community that helps everyone to thrive helps to create a we instead of a them. If you're doing these things, inclusivity, positivity, we mentality, person-centered approach, It should create an environment where everyone learns from each other. I think this is one of the most important things in creating a positive community and decreasing gatekeepers. By keeping our minds open to learning from anyone in the organization, no matter what their status or role, we allow ourselves to be versatile and open to growth. A growth mindset is one where the individual believes hard work, openness to input from others, and learning can develop talents, as opposed to a fixed mindset of this, you are born with talents. According to the Harvard Business Review, employees from companies with a growth mindset report feeling far more empowered and committed. They also receive far greater organizational support for collaboration and innovation. In contrast, people at primarily fixed mindset companies report more of only one thing: cheating and deception among employees, presumably to gain an advantage in the talent race. So why is this important to community and gatekeeping? Let's break it down with some statistics cited in that same Harvard article. Employees in a growth mindset company are 47% more likely to say their colleagues are trustworthy, 34% more likely to feel a strong sense of ownership and commitment to the company, 65% likelier to say that a company supports risk-taking, and 49% likelier to say that the company fosters innovation. These are all positive attributes that we would like to see in a community. We want to be in a trustworthy environment. We want to feel a sense of ownership and commitment. We want to be free to take risks and to innovate. Basically, we want the opposite of being stuck in a hamster wheel. There's no journey or excitement if you're running in the wheel. In most circumstances, it shouldn't matter if an employee is self-taught, went to a boot camp, or has a CS degree. It shouldn't matter if a parent took time off to raise children. Looking at the potential of each person, the effort they put in, and the ability to be independent learners can be a more valuable way to determine how a person will contribute as part of a community. When we recognize gatekeeping, we can prevent it and generate positive communities that are driven by a person-centered approach with a growth mindset. It took a diverse company of individuals to destroy the ring. There were times that they failed themselves and they failed others. There were moments of redemption. There was most definitely growth in every character on that journey. There's a reason why this is a popular novel and franchise. It's because we can see ourselves as the heroes. It's because we want the community that they have. We want people to help us when it's difficult. We want to help others when things are difficult. So I hope that you can take this talk and there are some things that you implement in your own life to help you evaluate how you can be a better community member, how you can raise the voices of those around you, how you can help bring other people into the community, and most of all, how we can identify where we're gatekeeping and how we can decrease those behaviors in ourselves and in those around us. So thanks for taking the time to listen to my talk.